From crime novels to real murder, how one woman solved what police couldn't. The coffee had gone cold in Evelyn Hartwell's hands when she heard the sirens. They cut through the morning quiet of Millbrook like a blade through silk, sharp and urgent. She set down her mug and moved to the kitchen window, pushing aside the pale yellow curtains her grandmother had sewn decades ago. 3 police cars raced down Maple Street, their red and blue lights painting the oak trees in violent colors. Behind them followed an ambulance, its siren joining the chorus of emergency. Evelyn's heart quickened. In a town of 3,000 souls, sirens meant something serious. "Mummy, what's that noise?" 7-year-old Rosie appeared at her elbow, still in her pajamas covered with dancing unicorns. "Just the police, sweetheart. Probably helping someone." Evelyn smoothed her daughter's copper hair, so much like her own. "Go wake your brother. Breakfast is ready." But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling in her stomach, tight as a fist. She'd been a crime reporter for 8 years before trading press passes for parent-teacher conferences. The instinct never left. Those sirens weren't racing to help someone fix a broken fence or rescue a cat from a tree. They were racing toward trouble. By noon, the whole town knew. Cordelia Ashworth was dead. Evelyn learned the news at the grocery store, where whispers followed her down every aisle like hungry ghosts. The checkout girl, barely 18 with nervous eyes, could barely contain herself. "Found her this morning," the girl said, voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. Mrs. Patterson went to check on her when she didn't show up for their morning walk. Door was wide open, house torn apart. Poor Mrs. Ashworth was on the living room floor. Evelyn's hands stilled on her shopping cart handle. Cordelia Ashworth, the town librarian. The woman who'd introduced Evelyn to the Thursday evening book club. The woman who remembered every child's favorite story and never charged late fees to struggling families. How terrible, Evelyn managed. "Do they know what happened?" "Robbery, they're saying. Someone broke in, probably looking for valuables. You know how these old houses are, full of antiques and such." The girl's eyes gleamed with the excitement of being first with the news. "Sheriff Bennett says it happens more than you'd think. City criminals driving out to small towns, thinking we're easy targets." Evelyn nodded and paid for her groceries, but her mind was already working. She'd covered dozens of break-ins during her reporting years. Something about this felt wrong, though she couldn't pinpoint what. That evening, she couldn't concentrate on anything. While her husband Thomas helped 9-year-old Oliver with his math homework, Evelyn found herself staring out the window toward the part of town where Cordelia had lived. The Victorian houses there stood like grand old ladies, their secrets hidden behind gabled roofs and wraparound porches. "You're thinking about Mrs. Ashworth," Thomas said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea. His dark hair was messy from running his fingers through it, something he did when he was stressed. "I can see it in your face. She was a good woman, Thomas. She didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." He handed her the tea, steam rising between them. "But you're not a reporter anymore, love. You're a mother. Our children need you here, not chasing dangerous stories." Evelyn took the tea but didn't drink it. "I'm not chasing anything. I'm just thinking." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The questions were already forming in her mind, neat and sharp as pins. Why would someone rob a librarian? What valuables could Cordelia have had that would be worth killing for? And why did the checkout girl's story feel like a performance, all polished and ready for telling? The funeral was held on a Tuesday, gray and drizzling as if the sky itself was mourning. Half the town crowded into St. Mary's Church, with its tall windows and wooden pews that creaked with the weight of grief. Evelyn sat with her family near the back, watching faces more than listening to words. Sheriff Bennett spoke about senseless violence and the need for better security. Mayor Whitmore promised increased patrols. The minister talked about Cordelia's dedication to the community, how she'd worked at the library for 23 years, how she'd touched so many lives. But it was the faces that interested Evelyn. The way Principal Edmund Fairweather kept checking his phone during the service. The way Councilman David Fletcher's wife Margaret gripped her purse like a lifeline, her knuckles white against the black leather. The way Dr. Pemberton, who'd been Cordelia's neighbor for 15 years, kept glancing toward the door as if he wanted to run. After the service, people gathered in the church hall for tea and sandwiches. Evelyn moved through the crowd, listening to fragments of conversation. Such a shame about her book collection, someone said. All those rare editions, just sitting there. I heard they didn't take anything valuable, another voice replied. Just made a mess and left. Doesn't make sense, does it? Breaking into a house and leaving empty-handed. Evelyn's ears pricked up. She turned toward the voices and saw two elderly women from the Historical Society, their gray heads bent together in conversation. Excuse me, Evelyn said, approaching them. I couldn't help overhearing. They didn't steal anything. The first woman, Mrs. Caldwell, adjusted her glasses. Well, that's what I heard from my neighbor, who heard it from her cousin who works at the police station. Said the house was ransacked, but all the good stuff was still there. Her grandmother's silver, her father's coin collection, even that beautiful jewelry box on her dresser. Maybe they were interrupted, the second woman suggested. Or maybe they were looking for something specific, Evelyn said, almost to herself. The women looked at her with curiosity. You're that reporter who married the Hartwell boy, aren't you? Mrs. Caldwell asked. Used to write for the big city paper? Used to, Evelyn confirmed. Now I'm just a concerned neighbor. But as she walked home that afternoon, her mind wouldn't let go of the questions. What had the intruder been looking for? Why tear apart a librarian's house but leave behind obvious valuables? And why did she feel like everyone at the funeral had been performing their grief instead of feeling it? That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and pen. Old habits died hard. She wrote down everything she knew, every detail she'd gathered, every inconsistency that bothered her. Thomas found her there at midnight, surrounded by pages of notes. Evelyn, what are you doing? She looked up, suddenly aware of how late it was. Just trying to make sense of things. The police are handling it. Sheriff Bennett has been doing this job for 20 years. He knows what he's doing. Does he? Evelyn tapped her pen against the paper. Thomas, when was the last time we had a murder in Millbrook? When was the last time Sheriff Bennett investigated anything more serious than drunk driving or petty theft? Thomas sat down across from her, his expression patient but tired. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe this isn't as simple as everyone wants to believe. Maybe there's more to Cordelia's death than a random robbery gone wrong. And maybe you're seeing mysteries where none exist because you miss the excitement of reporting. His words stung because they held a grain of truth. She did miss it sometimes. The thrill of following a lead, the satisfaction of uncovering the truth, the feeling that her work mattered. But this wasn't about nostalgia. This was about justice for a woman who'd spent her life serving others. I'm going to visit the library tomorrow, she said, closing her notebook. To pay my respects. Maybe volunteer to help sort through Cordelia's things. Thomas sighed. Just be careful, Evelyn. Whatever you think you're looking for, promise me you'll be careful. She promised. But even as she said the words, she knew she was walking into something darker than a simple burglary. The questions in her notebook seemed to glow in the lamplight, demanding answers that might be dangerous to find. The Millbrook Public Library smelled like old paper and lemon polish, just as it always had. Evelyn pushed through the heavy wooden doors and found herself in the main reading room, where dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Mrs. Hartwell? A young woman emerged from behind the circulation desk. Evelyn recognized her as Jenny Morrison, fresh out of college and newly hired as Cordelia's assistant. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Hello, Jenny. I came to see if there's anything I can do to help. I know this must be overwhelming for you. Jenny's face crumpled with relief. Oh, thank you. I don't know where to start. The police finished their investigation here yesterday, but everything's still such a mess. Cordelia's office, her files, her personal things. She gestured helplessly toward the back of the library. Why don't you show me what needs to be done? Jenny led her past the familiar shelves of fiction and reference books, past the children's section with its bright murals and tiny chairs, to a small office tucked behind the main desk. The door stood open, revealing chaos inside. They said someone broke in through the back door, Jenny explained. But I don't understand why they'd come here. There's nothing valuable, just books and papers. Evelyn stepped into the office and surveyed the damage. Desk drawers hung open, their contents scattered across the floor. File cabinets had been rifled through, papers everywhere. But something struck her as odd about the mess. Jenny, do you know what they were looking for? The police think it was random vandalism. You know, kids maybe, or someone looking for petty cash. Evelyn knelt down and began gathering scattered papers. Was there petty cash here? Maybe $50 in the desk drawer for small expenses. But that's still there. Jenny pointed to a small metal box sitting untouched on the windowsill. That's what's so strange. They made this huge mess but didn't take the money. As Evelyn sorted through the papers, she noticed something else strange. The mess wasn't random. Someone had been searching for something specific. The file cabinets had been opened systematically, each drawer pulled out and contents examined before being scattered. This wasn't vandalism. It was a methodical search. Jenny, did Cordelia keep any personal files here? Things that weren't related to library business. She had a few personal things, yes. Historical research mostly. She was always working on articles for the Historical Society newsletter. Jenny paused. Actually, she'd been working on something big recently. A project about the town's founding families. She was excited about it, said she'd found some interesting connections. Evelyn's pulse quickened. What kind of connections? I don't know exactly. She was being secretive about it, said she wanted to make sure she had all the facts straight before sharing it with anyone. But she spent hours going through old records, newspaper archives, that sort of thing. Are those files here? Jenny looked around the destroyed office. They should be. She kept them in the bottom drawer of her desk. She pointed to a drawer that hung open, completely empty. But I don't see them now. Evelyn stood up, her mind racing. Someone had broken into both Cordelia's home and her office, searching for something. The valuables left behind, the empty file drawer, the methodical nature of the search, it all pointed to one conclusion. Someone had been looking for Cordelia's research. Jenny, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully. In the weeks before she died, did Cordelia seem worried about anything? Scared? Different in any way? The young woman bit her lip, considering. Well, she had been acting a bit strange lately. More careful about locking up at night, always checking the windows before she left. And she'd been getting phone calls that upset her. What kind of phone calls? I don't know. She'd always take them in her office and close the door. But I could hear her voice sometimes, and she sounded angry. Or maybe scared. I asked her about it once, but she just said it was nothing important. Evelyn helped Jenny clean up the rest of the office, but her mind was elsewhere. Cordelia had been researching the town's history and had discovered something important enough to hide. Someone had known about her research and wanted it badly enough to break into her home and office to find it. But they'd been too late. If Cordelia had been scared, if she'd been getting threatening phone calls, she might have hidden her research somewhere safe. The question was where. As she walked home that evening, Evelyn found herself looking at Millbrook with new eyes. The tree-lined streets and neat houses suddenly seemed less innocent. Behind those doors and windows, what secrets were people hiding? What had Cordelia discovered that someone was willing to kill for? The next morning, Evelyn made a decision that would have terrified her 6 months ago. She was going to investigate Cordelia's murder properly. Not as a hobby or out of curiosity, but as systematically as she'd once investigated corruption scandals and political cover-ups. Her first stop was the Historical Society, housed in a converted Victorian mansion on the edge of town. If Cordelia had been researching founding families, this was where she would have started. Mrs. Beatrice Thornton, the Society's president, was a woman who seemed to have been born wearing pearls and a disapproving expression. She received Evelyn in the Society's main room, surrounded by portraits of long-dead residents and display cases full of dusty artifacts. "Such a tragedy about dear Cordelia," Mrs. Thornton said, settling into a velvet armchair. "She was one of our most dedicated researchers. Always here, always digging through the archives. I understand she was working on a project about founding families?" "Oh yes, she was quite excited about it. Said she'd found some fascinating connections between the early settlers and current residents. Historical genealogy, you know. People love to trace their roots back to the town's beginning." Evelyn leaned forward. "Did she share any of her findings with you?" Mrs. Thornton's expression grew thoughtful. She mentioned a few interesting discoveries. "Apparently, several of our most prominent families aren't quite what they seem. Old scandals, you know. Changed names, hidden marriages, that sort of thing." "What kind of scandals?" "Oh, the usual Victorian improprieties. Illegitimate children, business partnerships that ended badly, family feuds that lasted generations." Mrs. Thornton waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing that would matter to anyone today, surely." But Evelyn wasn't so sure. In a small town like Millbrook, family reputation still mattered. Old money families, political dynasties, business empires, they all depended on maintaining certain images. What if Cordelia had found something that could damage those carefully constructed reputations? "Mrs. Thornton, would it be possible for me to look through the same records Cordelia was using?" "I suppose so, dear. Though I'm not sure what you'd find that she didn't." She was quite thorough. The older woman led Evelyn to a small research room lined with filing cabinets and boxes of old documents. She spent most of her time with the birth records, marriage certificates, and old newspaper clippings. Particularly interested in the period between 1890 and 1920, Evelyn spent the next 3 hours going through the same records Cordelia had studied. Birth certificates with names crossed out and changed. Marriage records that didn't quite match up with family stories. Newspaper clippings about business deals, social scandals, and mysterious disappearances. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The Fletcher family, now one of the most prominent in town, had originally been named Fleischer and had changed their name after arriving from Germany under suspicious circumstances. The Fairweather family had covered up a scandal involving the town's founding school principal and a missing school fund. The Pemberton family had built their medical practice on a lie about their patriarch's medical credentials. But it was the last set of documents that made Evelyn's blood run cold. A marriage certificate from 1918, a birth certificate from 1919, and a newspaper clipping about a tragic accident in 1920. The names were different, but the story was clear. Someone had been living a lie for over a century, and that lie had been passed down through generations. As she photographed the documents with her phone, Evelyn heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Mrs. Thornton appeared in the doorway, her expression worried. "I'm sorry to interrupt, dear, but I've just had a call from Sheriff Bennett. He's asking about you, whether you've been here, what you've been looking at." She twisted her hands nervously. "I told him you were doing genealogy research, but he seemed quite insistent about knowing more." Evelyn's heart rate quickened. "What did you tell him?" "Just that you were looking through the same records as Cordelia." "But dear, he didn't seem pleased." "Perhaps you should speak with him directly." Evelyn gathered her things quickly. "Mrs. Thornton, I need to ask you not to mention what I found here today. Not to anyone, Not even the sheriff. But why? What have you found? Something that might explain why Cordelia died. And something that might put you in danger if the wrong people know you've seen it. The older woman's face went pale. Are you saying Cordelia was murdered because of her research? I'm saying it's possible. And I'm saying you should be very careful about who you trust right now. As Evelyn left the Historical Society, she felt eyes watching her from every window. The comfortable small-town atmosphere that had once felt protective now felt suffocating. How many people in Millbrook knew what she was doing? How many wanted to stop her? That evening, Evelyn sat in her car outside the town's newest coffee shop, watching through the windows as David Fletcher met with someone she didn't recognize. The councilman looked nervous, checking his phone constantly and glancing around as if he expected to be watched. Which, of course, he was. Evelyn had spent the afternoon following leads from Cordelia's research. The more she learned, the more complicated the picture became. The Fletcher family's name change was just the beginning. According to the records, the original Heinrich Fleischer had arrived in Millbrook in 1918, claiming to be a German immigrant seeking a new life. But a newspaper clipping from Chicago suggested something different. Heinrich had been wanted for embezzlement and had disappeared with a considerable sum of money. The man David Fletcher was meeting didn't look like a constituent. He was too well-dressed, too urban, too much like the kind of person who collected debts for a living. As Evelyn watched, Fletcher slid an envelope across the table. The stranger opened it, counted the contents, and shook his head. Fletcher's face went red, and he started speaking rapidly, his hands gesturing frantically. Evelyn took photos with her phone, zooming in as much as she could. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the body language. Fletcher was desperate, and the stranger was not impressed with whatever Fletcher was offering. The meeting ended with the stranger standing up and walking away, leaving Fletcher alone at the table with his head in his hands. Evelyn waited until Fletcher left, then followed the stranger to a black sedan parked 2 blocks away. She managed to photograph the license plate before the car disappeared into the evening traffic. Back home, Evelyn spread her findings across the kitchen table. The documents from the Historical Society, the photos from the coffee shop, and pages of notes about the connections she discovered. Thomas found her there after putting the children to bed. "You missed dinner," he said, but his tone was more worried than angry. "I'm sorry. I lost track of time." "Evelyn, what is all this?" He sat down and looked at the papers spread across the table. "This looks like you're building a case against half the town." "Because I think I am." She showed him the documents about the Fletcher family. "Look at this. David Fletcher's great-grandfather was a criminal who stole money and fled to Millbrook. The family's entire fortune was built on stolen money. That was over a century ago, Evelyn. What does it have to do with Cordelia's death? What if it's not ancient history? What if the family is still involved in something criminal?" She showed him the photos from the coffee shop. "I followed Fletcher tonight. He met with someone who looked like a debt collector, or worse. He gave the man an envelope, but it wasn't enough. They argued about it." Thomas studied the photos with a frown. "You followed him?" "Evelyn, this is dangerous. If these people are involved in criminal activity, if they killed Cordelia to protect their secrets, then you're putting yourself at risk." "I know it's dangerous. But Thomas, what if I'm the only one who can prove what really happened? What if the police are in on it, or too scared to investigate properly? Then you go to the state police or the FBI, or someone with more authority than Sheriff Bennett. You don't try to solve it yourself." Evelyn knew he was right, but she also knew that small-town corruption often went deeper than anyone expected. How many people in Millbrook owed their positions, their fortunes, their reputations to secrets that needed to stay buried? "I need to find Cordelia's research," she said. "The real research, not just what was in her office. If she was scared, if she was getting threatening calls, she would have hidden it somewhere safe. Where would she hide it? I don't know. but I know someone who might. The next morning, Evelyn visited Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had found Cordelia's body. The elderly woman lived in a neat cottage next to Cordelia's Victorian house, which now stood empty with police tape across the front door. "She was like a daughter to me," Mrs. Patterson said as they sat in her living room, drinking tea from china cups. "We had coffee together every morning, took walks every evening. If something was troubling her, I would have known." "Did she seem worried about anything in the weeks before she died?" Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. She'd been acting strange for about a month. Nervous, looking over her shoulder, jumping at small noises. I asked her about it, but she said it was nothing. Said she was just working on a project that had her stressed. "Did she ever mention feeling threatened?" "Phone calls, letters, anything like that." "There were phone calls." "I could hear her phone ringing at all hours, sometimes very late at night. Once I heard her shouting at someone, telling them to leave her alone." Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think she was being blackmailed." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Blackmailed? Did she tell you that?" "Not directly, but she made a comment once about how people would do anything to protect their secrets. She said some secrets were worth more than money, worth more than life itself." "Mrs. Patterson, if Cordelia wanted to hide something important, something she was afraid people would find, where would she put it?" The old woman thought for a moment. "She had a safety deposit box at the bank. But she also had a hiding place in her house that she thought was very clever. She showed it to me once, said it was where she kept her most important documents." "Where?" "Behind a loose board in the basement wall. She discovered it when she was having work done on the foundation. Said it was probably used by the Underground Railroad, back when this house was a stop for escaped slaves." Evelyn's heart raced. "Is it possible the police missed it?" "I don't think they spent much time in the basement. They were focused on the main floor, where—" Mrs. Patterson's voice trailed off. "Where she was killed." "Yes." Evelyn looked out the window at Cordelia's house. The police tape was gone, but the house remained empty. If Cordelia's research was hidden in a secret compartment, and if the police had missed it, then the evidence that could solve her murder was still there. "Mrs. Patterson, do you still have a key to Cordelia's house?" The old woman's eyes widened. "I do, but I couldn't possibly. What if I went in alone? What if I found what she was hiding and brought it to the police? That would be breaking and entering. It would be finding the truth." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Finally, she looked up at Evelyn with tears in her eyes. "She was like a daughter to me," she repeated. "If someone killed her to silence her, then they shouldn't get away with it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver key. Evelyn waited until midnight before crossing the yard between Mrs. Patterson's house and Cordelia's. The key turned smoothly in the back door, and she slipped inside with only a small flashlight to guide her way. The house still smelled like death and the chemicals the police had used to process the crime scene. Evelyn tried not to look at the living room as she made her way to the basement stairs, but she couldn't help seeing the dark stains on the hardwood floor where Cordelia had died. The basement was musty and cold, filled with the accumulated belongings of a lifetime. Evelyn ran her flashlight beam along the walls, looking for anything that might be loose or out of place. It took her 20 minutes to find it, a section of the stone foundation where the mortar looked newer than the rest. She ran her fingers along the edges and felt one stone shift slightly, heart pounding. She worked it loose and found a space behind it large enough to hold a manila folder. Inside the folder were documents that made her blood run cold. Cordelia's research went far beyond historical genealogy. She'd uncovered a network of corruption that reached into every level of Millbrook's government. Mayor Whitmore was taking bribes from developers. Sheriff Bennett was protecting illegal gambling operations. School board members were embezzling funds. And at the center of it all was David Fletcher, using his position as town councilman to coordinate the corruption. But the most shocking discovery was a recent bank statement showing large deposits into Fletcher's account, along with a series of photographs showing him meeting with known criminals from the city. Cordelia had been building a case that would have destroyed half the town's leadership and sent Fletcher to prison for the rest of his life. The final document in the folder was a letter dated just days before Cordelia's death. It was addressed to the state attorney general and detailed everything she'd discovered. She'd been planning to expose the corruption, but she'd never had the chance to send the letter. Evelyn photographed everything with her phone, then carefully replaced the documents in their hiding place. As she prepared to leave, she heard something that made her freeze, the sound of a car door slamming outside. She turned off her flashlight and crept to the basement window. A black sedan was parked in the driveway, the same car she'd seen Fletcher's mysterious contact driving. Two men were walking toward the house, one of them carrying what looked like a crowbar. Evelyn's mind raced. They were coming for the same thing she'd found. Someone had finally figured out where Cordelia had hidden her research. The question was, had they seen her go into the house? She heard the front door open and footsteps on the floor above her. The men were speaking in low voices, but she could make out enough to understand they were searching for something. One of them mentioned the old woman next door and what she might have told the reporter. They knew about her. Someone had been watching her investigation and had sent these men to find Cordelia's evidence and eliminate anyone who might have seen it. Evelyn looked around the basement frantically. There was no other way out, no place to hide. The men were coming down the stairs now, their flashlight beams dancing on the walls. She made a desperate decision. Pulling out her phone, she quickly sent a text message to Thomas. In danger. Cordelia's house. Call police. Evidence hidden behind loose stone in basement wall. Then she turned off her phone and slipped behind a large water heater in the corner of the basement, praying they wouldn't find her. The men spent 20 minutes searching the basement, their voices growing increasingly frustrated. One of them found the loose stone and examined the hiding place, but Evelyn had been careful to replace everything exactly as she'd found it. To their eyes, it looked undisturbed. Nothing here, one of them said. Maybe the old bat was lying about the hiding place. Fletcher's going to be pissed. He said this was our last chance to find that research before the heat comes down. Maybe it was destroyed in the fire at the library. There was no fire at the library. There will be tomorrow night, along with any other evidence that might still exist. Evelyn's blood ran cold. They were planning to burn down the library to destroy any remaining traces of Cordelia's research. She had to warn people, had to stop them. The men left, but Evelyn waited another hour before emerging from her hiding place. When she finally crept upstairs and peered out the window, the street was empty. She slipped out the back door and ran across the yard to Mrs. Patterson's house. The old woman was waiting for her with a cup of tea and a worried expression. Did you find anything? I found everything, Evelyn said, showing her the photos on her phone. And I found out why Cordelia was killed. She discovered that half the town government is corrupt, and she was going to expose them. Mrs. Patterson's face went pale. What do we do now? We go to the state police. Tonight. Before they can destroy the evidence or hurt anyone else. But as Evelyn reached for her car keys, she heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Through the window, she saw the glow of fire on the horizon, coming from the direction of the library. They were too late. The cover-up had already begun. The Millbrook Public Library was fully engulfed in flames by the time the fire department arrived. Evelyn stood with a crowd of townspeople, watching decades of history and knowledge turn to ash. But she was the only one who understood what was really burning, the last traces of Cordelia's research. Electrical fire, she heard Sheriff Bennett telling Mayor Whitmore. Old building, faulty wiring. These things happen. But Evelyn knew better. She'd heard the men talking about burning the library. This was arson. designed to destroy evidence and silence anyone who might have learned too much. She was about to leave when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find David Fletcher standing behind her, his face grim in the firelight. "Mrs. Hartwell, I think we need to talk." "I don't think we do. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. It's about Cordelia's research, and about what happened to her." Despite every instinct telling her to run, Evelyn followed Fletcher to a quiet spot away from the crowd. He looked older than his 50 years, his face lined with stress and exhaustion. "I know you've been investigating Cordelia's death," he said. "I know you found some of her research. And I know you think I killed her." "Did you?" "No. But I know who did, and I know why. And if you're smart, you'll stop digging before you end up the same way." Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm trying to save your life. You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved, how much money is at stake." "Then tell me." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, staring at the burning library. "It started small. Just a few favors for the right people, a few regulations overlooked in exchange for campaign contributions. But it grew. Before I knew it, I was in too deep to get out." "What kind of favors?" "Development deals that skirted environmental regulations. Gambling operations that the sheriff ignored. Money laundering through city contracts. It seemed harmless at first, but it became a machine that needed constant feeding. And Cordelia found out about it. She found out about all of it. Names, dates, amounts, everything. She had evidence that could have sent a dozen people to prison and destroyed the lives of dozens more." Evelyn pulled out her phone and showed him the photos she'd taken. "You mean this evidence?" Fletcher's face went white. "Where did you find that? Does it matter?" "What matters is that I have it, and I'm going to give it to the state police." "You can't. They'll kill you, just like they killed Cordelia." "Who will kill me?" "Who killed Cordelia?" Fletcher looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "Margaret. My wife. She found out about Cordelia's research, and she found out about—" He paused, his voice breaking. "She found out about my relationship with Cordelia." Evelyn felt the pieces clicking into place. "You and Cordelia were having an affair. It wasn't supposed to happen. We were working together on a city planning committee, spending long hours reviewing proposals and regulations. She was brilliant, passionate about making the town better. I fell in love with her. And Margaret found out. She hired a private investigator to follow me. He found out about the affair, but he also found out about Cordelia's research. Margaret realized that if Cordelia exposed the corruption, it would destroy our family's reputation and fortune. Everything we'd built would be gone. So she killed her. She tried to reason with Cordelia first, offered her money to keep quiet, threatened to expose the affair. But Cordelia wouldn't back down. She said too many people had been hurt by the corruption, that it had to stop." "How did Margaret kill her?" Fletcher's voice was barely a whisper. "She went to Cordelia's house that night, supposedly to make one final plea. But she brought a gun. When Cordelia refused to destroy the research, Margaret shot her. Then she ransacked the house to make it look like a robbery." "And you knew this?" "I suspected." Margaret came home that night covered in blood, claiming she'd hit a deer with her car. But there was no damage to the car, no deer. And the next morning, when we heard about Cordelia's death, Fletcher's shoulders sagged. "I knew what she'd done, but I couldn't prove it. And I couldn't turn in my own wife. You could have come forward. You could have told the truth. And admit to having an affair with a murder victim? Admit to being involved in the corruption she was exposing? I would have been the prime suspect." Evelyn felt a mixture of disgust and pity for the man standing before her. "So you let everyone believe it was a random crime. You let your wife get away with murder." "I tried to convince her to confess. I threatened to go to the police myself. but she reminded me that I was in this as deep as anyone. If the corruption network was exposed, I'd go to prison too. My children would lose their father and their mother. Your children are going to lose both parents anyway when the truth comes out. Not if you keep quiet. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Evelyn took a step back, suddenly aware of how isolated they were from the crowd. You can't cover this up forever, David. Too many people know the truth now. Actually, very few people know the truth. Cordelia's dead. Her research was destroyed tonight. You're the only loose end left. Evelyn's heart pounded as she realized the danger she was in. My husband knows where I am. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you if you're smart. Take your family and leave Millbrook. Start over somewhere else. Forget what you've learned here. I can't do that. Then you're going to join Cordelia. Evelyn heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Margaret Fletcher approaching. The woman looked perfectly composed, her gray hair neat despite the late hour, her expensive coat buttoned against the night chill. But her eyes were cold as winter stones. David, what are you doing? Margaret's voice was calm, controlled. You shouldn't be talking to her. I was trying to reason with her. Reason? Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. There's no reasoning with people like her. She's just like Cordelia, thinking she's some kind of crusader for justice, not understanding that some things are more important than the truth. Like what? Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Like family. Like legacy. Like the stability of an entire community. Margaret stepped closer, and Evelyn saw something metallic glinting in her hand. Cordelia would have destroyed dozens of families with her righteous crusade. Children would have lost their parents. Wives would have lost their husbands. The whole town would have been thrown into chaos. So you killed her. I protected my family and my community. Just like I'm going to protect them now. Margaret raised her hand, and Evelyn saw the gun. Small, silver, deadly. The same gun that had killed Cordelia Ashworth. Margaret, no. David grabbed his wife's arm. Not here. Not with all these people around. Then where? When? She knows everything, David. She has copies of Cordelia's research. She'll never stop digging until she destroys us all. Evelyn's mind raced, looking for an escape route. The crowd around the burning library was 50 yards away, but in the darkness, they wouldn't see what was happening until it was too late. You're right, she said suddenly. I do know everything. And I've already shared it with people who can protect me. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Am I? Do you really want to take that risk? If you kill me here, tonight, with all these witnesses around, do you think you can cover it up? Do you think Sheriff Bennett will be able to explain away 2 murders in 2 weeks? Bennett will do what he's told. But the state police won't. The FBI won't. And they're already involved. It was a bluff, but a convincing one. Margaret hesitated, the gun wavering in her hand. She's lying, David said, but he didn't sound certain. Maybe. But if she's not, if she's already contacted the authorities, then killing her only makes things worse for us. Evelyn seized the moment of uncertainty. I'll make you a deal. Let me walk away tonight, and I'll give you 24 hours to turn yourselves in. If you confess to Cordelia's murder and cooperate with the investigation, I'll testify that you showed remorse, that you were trying to do the right thing in the end. And if we don't, then I go to the state police with everything I have. Photos, documents, witness statements, everything. And you both go down for murder, conspiracy, and corruption. Margaret and David exchanged a long look. In that moment, Evelyn saw their marriage for what it really was. Not love, but partnership in crime, mutual protection based on shared guilt. 24 hours, Margaret said finally, lowering the gun. And then we disappear. You'll never see us again. I can't let you run. You can't stop us. And if you try, there are people who will make sure you regret it. Before Evelyn could respond, Margaret turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd around the burning library. David followed her, but not before giving Evelyn one last warning look. "You should have taken the money and kept quiet," he said. "Some secrets are worth more than life itself." Evelyn didn't wait 24 hours. She drove straight from the library fire to the state police barracks, arriving at 2 in the morning with a manila folder full of evidence and a story that would have sounded unbelievable if she hadn't had photographs to back it up. Detective Captain Rebecca Stone listened to the entire account without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification but never expressing disbelief. When Evelyn finished, Stone leaned back in her chair and studied the evidence spread across her desk. "This is extensive," the detective said. "You've essentially uncovered a criminal conspiracy involving half the town government. The question is, how much of this can we prove in court?" "All of it." Cordelia documented everything. Names, dates, bank records, photographs. She was building a case that would have been airtight. Was being the key phrase. If this evidence was destroyed in the library fire, it wasn't. Evelyn pulled out her phone and showed the captain the photos she'd taken in Cordelia's basement. "I found her hiding place before they could destroy everything. And I have backup copies stored in 3 different locations." Captain Stone smiled for the first time since Evelyn had arrived. "You think like a cop, Mrs. Hartwell. Or like a very good reporter." "I was a very good reporter. And I want to be a very good witness." By dawn, state police officers were surrounding the Fletcher house. But David and Margaret were gone, their beds unslept in, their suitcases missing from the closet. They'd run, just as Margaret had threatened. "We'll find them," Captain Stone assured Evelyn. "People like that always make mistakes when they're running scared. And we have enough evidence to charge them in absentia." The arrests began that afternoon. Sheriff Bennett was taken into custody at his office, Mayor Whitmore at City Hall. School board members, city council representatives, and local business owners found themselves facing charges ranging from bribery to money laundering to conspiracy. By evening, the story had reached the regional news stations. Evelyn found herself giving interviews, explaining how a small-town librarian's research had uncovered a web of corruption that reached into every level of local government. "Mrs. Ashworth died because she believed in the truth," Evelyn told the cameras. "She died because she thought the people of Millbrook deserved better than corrupt leaders and stolen money. The least we can do is make sure her death wasn't in vain." 3 days later, the Fletchers were arrested at a motel outside Chicago, trying to flee to Canada with false passports and a suitcase full of cash. Margaret confessed to killing Cordelia within hours of being brought back to Millbrook, though she showed no remorse for her actions. "I did what I had to do to protect my family," she told detectives. "That woman would have destroyed everything we'd worked for. She would have sent my husband to prison and left my children with nothing." David Fletcher received a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against the other conspirators. He would serve 10 years for his role in the corruption network. Margaret Fletcher was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Epilogue: New Beginnings. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in the rebuilt children's section of the Millbrook Public Library, watching her daughter Rosie choose books from the bright new shelves. The library had been reconstructed with donations from across the state, people who had been moved by Cordelia Ashworth's story and wanted to honor her memory. A bronze plaque near the main entrance read, "In memory of Cordelia Ashworth, librarian and truth seeker, who believed that knowledge belongs to everyone and that truth is worth any sacrifice." "Mommy, can we get this one too?" Rosie held up a mystery novel, something about a detective who solved crimes by paying attention to details that everyone else missed. "Of course, sweetheart. That looks like a good one." Thomas appeared beside them, carrying Oliver's selection of science books. "Find everything you need?" "Everything we need," Evelyn confirmed. She looked around the library, rebuilt and renewed, serving a community that was slowly learning to trust again. New leaders had been elected, new policies put in place, new oversight established to prevent the kind of corruption that had festered for so long. It would take time for Millbrook to fully heal. Some families had been destroyed by the revelations, some reputations ruined forever. But the truth had been told, justice had been served, and the community was stronger for having faced its darkest secrets. As they walked home through the tree-lined streets, Evelyn reflected on how much had changed. She'd returned to freelance journalism, writing articles about corruption and cover-ups for regional newspapers. The work was important, but she'd learned to balance it with her family life, to seek truth without sacrificing the people she loved. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked as they reached their front door. "Getting involved? Putting yourself in danger?" Evelyn looked back toward the library, where a light still burned in the main reading room. Cordelia Ashworth spent her life helping people find the information they needed. When she found information that could help an entire community, she was willing to die for it. How could I regret finishing what she started? That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, working on an article about the importance of local journalism and citizen oversight. Outside her window, Millbrook slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. But Evelyn knew that peace was fragile, that corruption could take root anywhere if good people chose to look away. She'd learned that truth was indeed worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. And she'd learned that sometimes the most important mysteries weren't found in the pages of crime novels, but in the secrets that ordinary people carried in their hearts. The difference between fiction and reality was that real mysteries had real consequences, real victims, and real heroes. Cordelia Ashworth had been such a hero, and in the end, that was the truth that mattered most. The end. We encourage you to like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed the video. Please share your thoughts in the comments section and explore our channel for a diverse range of content, including audiobooks, murder mysteries, psychological thrillers, and classic novels. We strive to provide comprehensive and engaging storytelling experiences. Your visit is highly appreciated, and we are confident you will find content to your liking.